Welcome to Robb's Garage. I am Robb. This here's my garage. Tonight on the lift, we're working on a 2012 Mini Cooper S, 1.4 liter turbo, manual. It's the R56 generation. Lots of fun to drive. You can throw these things around despite them even being front wheel drive. I read recently an automotive journalist quoted years ago that these minis are a feat of engineering ingenuity and creativity. And I thought, well, yeah, to be able to put a motor of that size, to squeeze it in an engine bay that small, I'll hand it to those BMW engineers. They did a really amazing thing. However, they did not take into consideration the mechanic whatsoever. Anytime you got to work on these things, get into the engine bay, you have to take so many things off to get to your problem. And I'm going to show you one example of that right now. Since my son bought this vehicle about 1.5 years ago, 10,000 or so miles ago, we've had 3 different coolant leaks that we've dealt with. Most common are on the passenger side in the water pump. Okay, these are known for having leaky water pumps. If you're going to replace the water pump, you have to take off the wheel well, take off the belt here. If you're going to take up the belt, I recommend replacing not just the belt, but also the belt tensioner and the friction wheel that drives the water pump up there. Might as well do all of that. The second leak we dealt with was the water pipe that connects the water pump to the thermostat housing, and it's so high up there you can't even see. They're extremely difficult to work on. I literally hate that. And then we just recently identified a new issue. Okay, we had coolant leaking down where the catalytic converter normally sits here, and could not figure out what was causing that leak. So this is the ultimate culprit of this third most recent leak. This little seal, you can see where it's broken there. It's got all kinds of dried coolant on it. It goes on the back of oil filter housing behind it that mounts to the engine block. Okay, that coolant gasket fits to the back of the oil filter housing here. And in front of the oil filter housing, you have an oil cooler. Now, over here on the other end, that's where your oil filter actually is. When you change your oil, that filter comes off. You access it from the top of the engine bay in this car. Well, the leak that I found is not commonly reported, at least I didn't find on the internet. And you'll see that the gasket goes up here for the coolant. That little thing was leaking, causing all kinds of havoc. There's another gasket for the oil here. So I'm replacing both of those gaskets so that it has a proper seal to the engine block there. If you're gonna go through the process of accessing either the oil filter housing here or the oil cooler that sits in front of it, which keep in mind has its own seals, which I also will be replacing, 4 of them, 2 for oil, 2 for coolant, I believe. If you're gonna go through the process of accessing all that, you might as well replace some other parts while you're here, because it's a lot of work to get to this. Oil feeder line that goes to the turbo. Next to it, I'll be replacing the oil return line. So the 2 lines that run off of the auxiliary or electric water pump here. One goes to the turbo and the other goes up to the oil cooler, which will be mounted back in front of the oil filter housing. Okay, so new gaskets are installed in the oil filter housing, and it's torqued back down. You can see there are 4 bolts here, 1, 2, 3, and the 4th is hidden up there. First I clean off the rear of the housing and the block. Use a little scouring pad, very, very gently with some rubbing alcohol, get it nice and clean, and tighten that down. And then I put the new seals on the front, which goes to the oil cooler, and do the same cleaning routine there. So I'm about to put the oil cooler on, but wanted to show you, you know, before you get to that point, you should replace the oil filler feed line right here. And there's the oil return line. Those both go to the turbo. The feeder line goes up top, return line goes on bottom. You'll notice on bottom I have not tightened that screw down yet that goes up to the turbo. And the reason being is, first there's a heat shield that goes in between this and the bracket that covers up the feeder line and the return hose right there. So I'm gonna slip that heat shield in there, tighten it down, and then I'll torque down the turbo support bracket here, and finally that screw up there. A lot of people online say if you're gonna do a job like this, you need to remove the turbo completely, which is up there, as well as the exhaust manifolds. I found you don't need to do that. What you do need to do is loosen the turbo so there's enough play. So I've just loosened it a little bit. Didn't even take the support bracket off. Just loosened it so I could get in there. So I recommend installing the oil filter housing first, the piece back here that connects to the block. Then the oil filler line, which is back in there, behind that heat shield. Then the oil return line, at least the bottom part. Leave the top off for a little bit. Install this heat shield here, okay? And the bracket, the support bracket from the turbo. Tighten the turbo down. And then this line that goes to the auxiliary water pump, install that on top of the oil filter housing first, then install the oil cooler. And the final thing you'll do here is install the other line that connects from the auxiliary water pump. Hard to see there, but it goes up to the turbo, up about there. So do that, and then the last thing is install the catalytic converter and its the other heat shield that goes in front of it here with the O2 sensor there, and then there's an O2 sensor up top. Okay, here's it running. Everything's good, no leaks. But at first, there's a leak coming out of the oil filler or oil feeder line here. Even though I used new washers, I didn't use a new banjo bolt, so oil starts coming out. Ended up replacing the banjo bolt on both this side and the engine block. And it's working great. Problem solved.